There we go. We've started. So good evening, everybody. And thank you very much for those of you that have managed to get here and be with us live. We have a fair few people who have asked for the recording of this, and I know some of those are people who are very, very new to us. So I thought I would just start with a little bit of an introduction. For those of you that know us, please bear with me, but a little bit of an introduction of who we are and kind of what it is we're doing here, why we're doing this webinar. Oh, so you did open something.
Easy.
So my name's Debra Simmons, and this is my lovely niece, Beck, and together we run a company called Dare to Be You. And it is very much, we share a simple spirituality to really help people improve their lives. We have loads and loads of fun all the time. Even when life gets a little bit crazy, which it often does. We often have a few things thrown at us and life can get a little bit crazy. But it's really, really good to kind of look to that deeper truth of who we are. And that is what we point people back towards, the deeper truth of who they are. And our own experience has really borne out that when we look in this direction, our day-to-day ordinary life, you know, when we're washing up and when the children misbehave and when we need to be somewhere and we're running late, or when we get stuck in traffic, or, you know, we're at work and our boss is being a pain, any of those things, it's really much easier to deal with those kinds of things in life when we have this understanding, a deeper understanding of the truth of who we are. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we're going to kind of have a little bit of a chat first and kind of share with you what we've seen around this inner peace and outer success, because we've had a lot of questions, we've had a lot of people talking to us around that. So, and I did a webinar, when was that? A couple of weeks ago?
About 3 weeks ago.
And unfortunately, Beck couldn't be here with me at that time because something came up for Beck, and so I did that one on my own, and Beck was really like, I wanted to be a part of that webinar, so we decided that we would do it again. So here we are. So we have muted everybody, and we will be opening up for questions a bit later, but we will keep everybody muted, because when you get a few people on here, you know, we can accidentally make noises in the background and things like that, so it's much easier if everybody is muted to start with. And if you have got questions, it would be really helpful to us if you type them in. There is a box to type them into if you do that, or we will open up if you want to speak a little bit later. So Beck.
Yeah, so the title of our webinar is What Stops You Experiencing Inner Peace and Outer Success, which was a bit of a mouthful. But it was some inspiration, I think, that came to Deb a couple of weeks ago when we said we were going to do this webinar. And it's actually something that's really quite, I think, close to both of our hearts, stuff that kind of stops us from feeling at peace and being able to be successful and do the stuff we want to do out in the world. So we thought we would just start by sharing a little bit about our background and what stopped us in the past. So Deb, do you want to start with a little bit of kind of what stopped you, and then I'll join in?
Well, it first of all really appeared to me that there was a lot of things out in the world, like other people was a huge thing that looked to me as if it got in the way of me being me and doing what I wanted to do. I seemed to have this idea that I needed other people's approval. I needed people to like me, so that I could be okay. And I found that a real hindrance to me doing any of the things that I wanted to do out in the world. And I found myself up in my head and worrying and panicking about a lot of things a lot of the time. It took up a lot of energy to try and keep everybody happy all of the time. And I don't know if anybody has ever tried to do that, kind of organize the world, because it really looked to me like the outer world it had to be right for me to be okay inside. It looked like there was a real connection between those two, and if things weren't going right in the outside world, then I wasn't going to be okay. And you know, when you've got children and a partner and you're working and doing things, it can be a lot of plates to keep spinning and balls to juggle at the same time to try and keep all of those things how you feel they should be, so that your life can be okay. So it really felt to me, if you'd have asked me to list the things that it was that was stopping me from having inner peace and outer success, it would have been quite a long list, and there would have been a lot of people's names on that list, as well as circumstances like not enough money, not living in the right place, not having the right opportunities come up. So that was definitely where I was for a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, my story in some ways is fairly similar to that. I definitely boxed myself in and kind of gave myself labels. I am this kind of person. I go to this particular church. I believe in these particular things, and I have to behave in a certain way. And I definitely did a lot of that kind of storytelling around, in order for people to like me and approve of me, I have to behave in these ways, dress in this particular way, say these particular words. And I had it all set up, and everything was kind of interlinked and intertwined, and I wouldn't be okay if people didn't like and approve of me. And therefore I had to behave in these particular ways. And it's so easy to kind of get lost in that sort of behavior and those sorts of stories, and to just be... to sort of know in your heart that isn't who you really are, to know in your heart that that isn't really what you want to be doing or how you want to be living, but to be so lost in believing that we need to do those things to feel okay about ourselves, to have our kind of happiness. And our love was the biggest one for me. I very much was lost in order to feel love, these are the things I have to do and the rules I have to play by. And I got myself into some right royal messes because of thinking that that's how it worked, that it worked from a kind of outside-in perspective, that love came from outside of me, and in order to receive it, I had to tick the right boxes. And when I kind of came across this understanding that we share, and saw that it was utterly the other way, and love comes from inside of me, kind of nothing stopped me from there. So yeah, I think that was, for me, that was kind of what stopped me, was believing that love and approval came from outside of me. So yeah, I think that's kind of maybe a brief on what stopped us. And there might be stuff in there that kind of resonates with you, and hopefully as we share some more stuff, there'll be something that you kind of resonate with. But we've got some questions that have come in specifically around this kind of topic. And the first one, which is a very obvious question, is what is inner peace and outer success? So do you want to start with something on that, Deb?
Yeah, very, very often our definition of these things, can trip us up to start with. So very much for a very long time, I lived from a place of fear. I was very, very scared of a lot of things. I was very scared of my own feelings. I was scared of some of the thoughts that passed through my mind. And then I was scared of doing things. I used to be scared of driving. I used to be scared of going places. I had high anxiety, those kinds of things. So to me, I craved some peace and quiet in my mind. I craved my mind just to shut up, because it felt like, there was this kind of somebody talking at me the whole time, telling me that I was no good and that I was useless and that I would never succeed and that I wouldn't be able to do that, and this person wouldn't like me and I wasn't good enough or whatever. And very, very occasionally that voice might be nice to me, but for an awful long time that inner voice that spoke to me wasn't particularly friendly. It wasn't nice to me. It didn't say nice things. And so, as I said, the fear that came from that, and the things that I would do, is very often our behaviours then result from us trying to get out of that space in our heads. I would try to do things, try to control things, try to be in the right places and be a certain type of person to try and make that my mind go a little bit quiet. And sleeping sometimes could be quite I wouldn't sleep. I would wake up and I would find that I would be fast asleep, and then I would suddenly jolt awake and I would have this feeling of dread and fear, and I couldn't even have told you where it came from. I just had this terrible sick feeling and felt, really uncomfortable. And so to actually crave just a feeling of peace and quiet and loving myself, really would be one way I would describe it. I just absolutely craved being in a place of being okay with who I was, kind of being, do you know what, you're okay, you're all right. And coming across this understanding and actually seeing that, even though I can have my moments when there's absolutely things about my body and myself, that I can have moments of not liking them. Overall, generally, I like who I am these days, and that creates a lot more inner peace. It creates a much more peaceful atmosphere in my mind. And that was a byproduct of beginning to look in the direction of the deeper truth of who I am.
I think for me, peace used to be something the peace was something I was afraid of, because there was so much going on in my life and so much going on in my head that the idea of being, kind of quiet and in a peaceful space was frightening. We actually did, a few months ago, we ran a silent retreat, and for I think it was 3 days, we were just entirely silent. We didn't talk to each other. We didn't listen to stuff. It was just 3 days of silence. And a couple of years ago, that would have really floored me, like absolutely frightened the life out of me, because it looked to me like if I was ever in a space where I was quiet and things were peaceful outside of me, there would be so much going on in my head that I would just scare myself half to death. So I was never ever peaceful and quiet. I always had the TV on or the radio on, or I was watching something, reading something, doing something, talking to people, going out. I just never allowed myself any quiet time at all, because I was too afraid of what was going on up here. And so for me now, that inner peace is what I've seen around actual inner peace is the true nature of who we are. The absolute truest essence of what we are is peace. And so I'm not so afraid now to be quiet. It doesn't happen very often, granted, but it's not something I'm afraid of anymore, because I know if I'm in a space where it is quiet, and I often will go and sit out in the garden and just sit and listen to, the sounds of nature, and I'm not afraid to be in that space anymore, because I know that peace is who and what I am. And I might have thinking and thoughts going on up here, but underneath that, beyond that, there's this space of peace that is actually the truth of who we all are. And that's massively what we kind of point to, on these webinars and in any work that we do, is the fact that we are this inner peace. That inner peace that we are seeking for is already who we are. And so that's, for me, the part about what is inner peace. And from that space, as far as I can tell, outer success comes from that space. And one of the simplest examples I often think about for that is I do a lot of writing. I write blogs and we write newsletters and things like that. And when I sit down to write, if I've got a lot of turmoil going on in my head, I'm way less likely to be able to write a nice, easy, flowing blog. And I can really see the difference when I sit down at my computer and I'm feeling at peace. I'm feeling that piece of who I am. The words just flow from me. And to my mind, that is outer success. That is when we're in that space of peace, whatever comes out from us feels comfortable, easy, gentle, and it's flow. So I think that's kind of...
And I think, before I ever came across this understanding, some of the things that I did out in the world, I was quite successful at some of the things that I did. I was a seamstress, and I did a lot of sewing. I did a lot of creation, which I really enjoyed, and I created some beautiful things and really got pleasure from that. The difference that I see now in any of the things that I do is the place that comes from now, and the understanding, because it used to look to me that anything I did out in the outside world would determine how I felt on the inside. If I did it right, if I got it right, if I had enough, if I did everything correctly on the outside, then I would feel good on the inside. And that is absolutely night and day different now. I see that totally differently. It's like, if I am at peace on the inside, then what I do on the outside, there's nothing riding on it. So it's much easier to be way more bold out in the world than I used to be. You know, I used to hide. I used to be frightened. I would have never in a million years done a webinar like this, spoken to people, certainly not spoken to people that I didn't know. And, you know, when I was walking around, I would make sure that I didn't make eye contact with people. I would be looking at the ground, try to be hidden. Whereas now, I very much that some of the words that will sometimes go through my head is, well, if there's nothing riding on this, if you knew there was nothing riding on this, what would you do? What would you say? You know, if I've got to speak to somebody or send an email, if you just loved the person standing in front of you and there was absolutely nothing riding on it, what would you say next? What would you do? And then you know, coming from that space, I don't know about you, but when we are around people who feel desperate and feel needy and feel like they need something, we get a feel for people's energy, don't we? You know, we kind of know when somebody is desperate for something to be different or coming from that space. And yet when we are around someone who is just in a quiet, calm mind and just in that place, I know we were talking the other day and the words that came out there was, I don't mind what happens. And when we absolutely genuinely from our heart don't mind what the outcome of something is, then we are coming from a very different place within us. And I know that has made such a difference in my interactions with people and what I do moment to moment, when I'm genuinely just fall into that place of, I really don't mind what happens. And also coming from a kind place. It seems to me like our basic essence is love and peace and wisdom. And when we come from that place within ourselves and we've just fallen into that place, what we do out in the world, that feels like absolute true outer success. And however that manifests, whatever that is for you, it is a pleasure to live from that place, and it is a pleasure to be around people who are living in that space.
Yeah, and I think that actually leads us really nicely into the next question, because often when you say sort of things like, oh, I don't mind what happens, I don't have anything riding on the outcome, the question can kind of come back, well, either then I'm going to be kind of trampled all over or trodden down, or people will take advantage of me, or I'm not going to care enough to bother going out in the world and doing something. If I don't mind what happens, why would I bother going out and making any kind of success of myself? So our kind of next question is, how is this actually going to work? Like out in the real world, out in life, how am I going to, you know, where does success come from if actually we don't mind what happens? So yeah, I think that's kind of our next question.
Well, it very much feels to me, what I notice, I know that we have spoken before about this place of balance that we can get to, and it looks, I know there's an awful lot of talk around, if any of I know some of you on this call have been around the understanding that we are pointing towards the 3 principles, and I know there's a lot of talk lately in the 3 principles community about non-duality, and you know, there's some kind of toing and froing. How does this all fit in? How does it all work together? You know, if we are all one and we, you know, there's no separate entity here, and the question, you know, the things that Bex just talked about, you know, how does anything ever get done? Well, what it looks like to me is, as we look in the direction of the truth of who we are, we do begin to see that the separate person that we believe ourselves to be somehow is less and less important to you. But in spite of the way that that might look as if then, so what I'm going to do all day is sit on a chair and do nothing. What this points to, what non-duality points to, you know, life, if you look out in nature, if you look at flowers and trees, you know, what is the point? Flowers don't, each individual flower doesn't have a purpose in life other than to be a flower and do what a flower does, you know, and it puts its all into producing its beautiful petals. It shines for its moment and then it's past. And flowers do that again and again and again and again. And, you know, we could say, well, what's the point of that? There's no purpose. And yet, if you've ever taken a walk out in nature and looked at the grass and the trees and the flowers, and it's life, the way that life lives through these things, the way that it expresses itself through all these beautiful things is just breathtaking and beautiful. And when you have got to that place when your head isn't going crazy and you have a little bit more of this inner peace, it's just amazing to be out in that way. And human beings, we're not separate from that. Non-duality points to the fact we are not separate from that. You know, we are just as much like a flower or a tree, or, you know, we are, nature is expressing through us. And to just be lived, just to allow life to live us, it is just amazing what will come through you. What I know a few of you know, and I'm absolutely full of this at the moment, so I do apologize. New grandma warning. Yeah, I'm just I got a tiny he's almost 10 weeks old, my gorgeous new grandson, and to just watch life living through him, just they are literally time wasters, new babies. I don't know if anyone else has ever, you know, if you've ever been around such a tiny new baby, they are absolute time wasters. And we see it with puppies and kittens and those. We can just literally sit for hours, well, I can, and just watch this gorgeous new creation just be. And, you know, we are that too. We have, just because we've grown up, just we are that wonder, we are that beauty, we have that living through us too. And, you know, we're here, that's our purpose. And if we allow life to live through us, it is just mind-blowingly amazing, like a gorgeous flower out in any garden. We absolutely have the most beautiful purpose. And we don't, it's not been my experience that I sit back and do nothing. I'm actually way more productive from this in a peaceful place.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of where I was going to go next, is the comparison with how I used to live my life, and when I had all this stuff going on up in my head, and when I was trying desperately to, the person I worked for at the time, I was trying desperately to make sure she was okay, I was okay, my partner was okay, my friends were okay, my family were okay. I had so many things and people I felt I had to take care of, that I was entirely responsible for, that and this is, I'm not even lying. I showed you the spreadsheet the other day, didn't I, Deb? My to-do list was like about 6 pages long. And it was just constant lists of things I needed to do. I had to get them done. I was entirely responsible for. And what I actually got done every day was moving things around on my to-do list. This is a higher priority. I'll put this here. That one can go over here on this tab, or that one doesn't need doing till tomorrow. And I spent all day moving things around on my to-do list, and that was the most I ever got done. And that was from living up here in constant thinking and constant feeling like I was responsible. And for me now, because I live from this inner peace and life lives through me, we are pretty productive.
We do pretty well.
We even get to go and sit out in the garden and have our lunch, because we're living, life is being lived through us. And when we are coming from that space, the amount of things that we get done, and for me, the lack of pressure in getting those things done, it never feels like we're grafting really hard, and it never feels like
some days it definitely does.
We graft very hard. Oh yeah, noted here, don't mention that we don't. But it is that difference between feeling like, when I used to go to work in my old job a few years ago, feeling like I was on the bus traveling to work, and the closer and closer I got, the more my shoulders went down and down and down, and I just slumped in my chair because I knew all the things I had to get done. And that just isn't the space I live from. And you know, if ever that kind of thinking comes to me, oh, I've got so much to do, it's momentary before it passes, because I realize that I'm taking way more responsibility than is mine. And there is this space of balance that I'm in now, where I can see how much I'm responsible for versus the fact that I am not responsible at all for how life is lived through me or anybody else. And in that space of balance, the outer success and the productivity that comes from when we're just here going, hey, what would be fun to do next? Oh, I know, a webinar. You know, the amount of things that come out of the conversations we have when we know the balance of being entirely responsible for living our lives and not being responsible at all for living our lives.
That's just paradox.
Yeah, the paradox, that space where those two things meet in the middle. Well, you can see kind of what we get up to. You're here on this webinar, presumably because you've seen something that we've put out and you've gone, oh, that might be interesting. You know, and that is how we turn up every day, from this space of bringing together, being both entirely responsible for what I do out in the world and knowing that responsibility does not rest on my shoulders.
That is a really, really fun place to live from. Yeah. Kind of taking action, like setting up a webinar, talking to people. We have conversations with people. At the moment, we've got some free call things going on, and we're having some amazing conversations with some absolutely beautiful people, and we're just having some real fun around that. So absolutely stepping up to life when it asks you to take responsibility for something, and yet being in that space of absolutely knowing I'm not responsible at all. And we can tell by our feelings absolutely tell us when we've moved into that place. Like Beck says, if she has this momentary feeling of, oh gosh, I'm responsible for this, oh gosh, you know, if we feel like that, that feeling isn't telling us about the outside world. That's telling us that we've started to take a little bit too much responsibility for something. We think that, you know, the way somebody else thinks, or the way the world works, or the way something should be is down to us. You know, we've moved back into that place of feeling responsible for something that we're not responsible for. And yet when we go out in the world and create stuff and do things, you know, do what we're called to do, what, you know, turn up to our job, live, you know, our lives, be kind to our spouse, whatever, you know, do the washing up, do the hoovering, whatever it is, if we kind of step up to do what's asked of us, but from this place of knowing that we're not truly responsible for anything, it's a really lovely place to live from.
And the thing that, one of the things that I've really seen is when we kind of step up, we're doing a 90-day online journey at the moment called the Warriors Journey. And one of the things we do as part of that is invite people who are on the course to take part in some challenges. And the part of the reason we do that, and they're all kind of fun and light-hearted challenges, but there's also an element of what we see around this is that inviting people to actually step up in life and take part in life. It's amazing when we do the smallest of things, how much kind of life, the universe, God, energy, whatever you want to call it, meets us way more than halfway. When we're out there playing the game of life, life plays right back at us. It really comes at us with like, okay, so you want to run a webinar. Okay, here's 10 people that are going to turn up and listen to you. You know, that is how life does this. We sat here one day and went, hey, wouldn't it be fun to do another webinar because I missed out first time round. Next day, Deb says, oh, let's call it this. Here we are today, and 10 people have turned up. 9. Someone just dropped off. But this is how life meets us. We do our small amount, and life just comes right back and goes, okay, if that's what you're going to do, you're not going to play small, we're going to go for this. And I don't even really know how that works. There's some magic in here. It's the same as whatever makes an acorn grow into an oak tree. I don't really know how that works, other than I absolutely know that it does. I've seen it time and again in what we do, in when we talk to other people and have conversations and share this, what happens for them in their lives. And, you know, the smallest of things, like Deb was saying about flowers, when you go out in nature. I absolutely love gardening. I was out just before this webinar getting my hands dirty and planting some flower. And I love watching, like I plant a flower that's about this big and 3 weeks later it's this big and it's blossoming I don't really know how that works, other than it does. If I do my bit and I plant it, it works. And that for me looks the same here with life. This is how life works. And when we see that inner peace in us, we start stepping up and taking action. It's not been my experience that we get peaceful and go, oh, well, there's nothing to do, sitting back, not doing anything. We're here on this webinar tonight because we are just inspired to be out sharing this with people, because life just keeps coming through us.
And we're not saying that every single thing that we ever do is an absolute utter success, and that, you know, we never take a step wrong and nothing bad ever happens to us, you know, or this is la life. We're not, that's not what we're pointing to. It is, you know, sometimes life asks us to step up and things don't work out the way we had it planned that it was going to work out. But what I've started to notice is that I can absolutely, from this place of inner peace and knowing that there's nothing riding on this, I can trust life. And if something doesn't turn out the way that I thought it would, that's okay. That comes back to the, I don't mind what happens. This is what I'm planning. This is what I'm going to put out there. This is what I'm going to do. And when we start, like Beck says, life always comes to meet us. When we start to do things, things start to happen. That's life. That's, you know, when we put things out there, things start to happen. And it doesn't always necessarily happen the way that I have decided that it should and that I wanted it to, but things get in motion and things begin to happen. And so long as we don't box ourselves in and label things as, oh, you know, that's not a success, it shouldn't have happened in this way, no, I'm just going to keep banging my head against this wall till it happens the way that I think it should, you know, that's when we suffer and struggle. But if we are good to roll with life and wait and see, invariably, if we keep showing up and keep doing what life invites us to do, we will shine, we will flower, we will blossom at some point. Did we have a question?
I was just going to say, we're about on time for questions, and it looks like we've got one, so let's have a look. Oh, how are we not responsible for our actions? Missed that one. Okay. Oh, Deb.
Well, what I have seen when I first came across this understanding of life, as you know, from some of the things that I've shared with you tonight, my life wasn't great. I wasn't in a good place. I wasn't a happy person particularly. I wasn't very stable. And when I came across this understanding, when somebody pointed me towards the principles and pointed me towards how life worked, and the fact that I was living in the feeling of what I was thinking and things weren't quite the way that it seemed, I was absolutely blown away. And very, very quickly, because of all sorts of things that had happened in my life, my children were struggling, a lot of the people around me were struggling, I kind of thought, oh my gosh, everybody should know this. And I started to be a little bit quite vocal about it and sharing it with everybody that I met. But what I began to see, that's why Beck's here. But what I began to see, I didn't used to like who I was. And as I looked in this direction and began to like myself and began to see how much this would help my life, and then I came across, you know, the understanding that I'm not separate from other people, I began to see that there wasn't truly a separate me who needed to do anything different to what I was doing. And there wasn't other people who I needed to force into hearing what it was I was sharing. And that was kind of an understanding that dawned on me, something that, oh, we're not completely separate beings. That's not how this life works. And as I saw that and began to see that there weren't other people that needed help, that was paradoxically the most helpful thing that I have ever seen and started to understand. And it's the same with this, we are not responsible. It looks to me there's a place of balance that we can live from, and our feelings are always our guide. It's always in the feeling. If we do what life asks us to step up to do, but with an absolute understanding that life is living through us. There is no separate Debra here who is doing this. Life is happening through me. There isn't an individual that is responsible for what I am doing. And when I live from that place of understanding that, but act as if and take responsibility as if I am responsible, that is the optimum place to understand and live from, because I act out in life. I do things. I'm kind, I'm considerate. When I'm in, I'm not saying I'm like that all the time, but when I'm in that place, that's what comes through me. And it's through, and almost like a meditative understanding of the truth of who I am. And that's what non-duality points us towards, that, you know, there isn't a separate person doing anything here. The illusion here is that there is a separate person. But just kind of having a tiny glimpse of that and seeing that. And even when we don't know that, if you just for the next few days, I would just invite you to play around with watching what your feelings do and kind of noticing when you go into a place of, oh my gosh, I've got to do that, I'm totally responsible for that, just getting quiet for a minute and kind of just getting curious around, what if you're not responsible? You're going to do it, but you haven't got this massive weight on your shoulders. It's not like the world's going to end or something terrible's going to happen if you don't do this. What if you're just going to do it from a place of, yeah, this is mine to do, but however it works out, it's okay, because it's not actually all down to me. I have this amazing creative essence of the universe working through me that's going to help. And I don't have to get stuck in my brain and my tiny mind and work all this out. I'm just going to allow it to happen. And when we get curious in that way, you might be incredibly surprised what you find. Life becomes much easier and much lighter. And you know, those words, we're not responsible but live as if we are, can be quite confusing at first when we hear them. But you know, I really invite you to get curious around that and play with it, and just don't take my word for it. Just begin to notice when you start, if you start to feel not great within yourself, if you feel miserable or as if life is too hard or something, just play around and just get curious. Well, what if I'm taking responsibility for things that I'm not responsible for? Or what if I'm not stepping up to what life's asking me to do? And just get curious about that. And I would love to hear, you know, if anyone does get curious around that, anything. And if questions come up, please feel free to like message us, get in touch and ask away. But it's a really beautiful thing to play around with.
Yeah, one of the things that we kind of keep pointing to at the moment is phrase "Know Thyself," because all of this that we're sharing is kind of our insights and what we've seen, and we have, exactly like Deb just said, we got curious and we got to know what our feelings are pointing to for us personally, and so it would always be an invitation for you to get to know yourself and see where you can see this, and you'll notice where your feelings are taking you and what they're kind of pointing to, and your wisdom will come through. Because there's always this danger that people will hear us saying, oh, you're not responsible for your action, and think what we're saying is, oh, therefore go out and do what you like and treat people how you want, behave what you know, do anything or be anything in a careless way. And what we're actually pointing to is your feelings will tell you if you're doing that. If you're going out and just being careless with people and with your life, you'll know that, you'll feel that. And so it's the invitation is there to go, right, what is my feeling telling me? Actually being careless and horrible with other people doesn't come with a nice feeling. And so that invitation is there, and your wisdom will be guiding you on that too. Like in this moment, it's nice to step up and take responsibility. Like when I do things sometimes, I'll apologize to someone. I can see that I've done something that they feel has been upsetting to them, and I'll apologize for that. That's me taking responsibility, because my feelings go, oh, that wasn't so nice how I just treated that person. And that is where our wisdom kind of comes in and guides us with that kind of thing, where there is places to go, okay, so I can take responsibility here. And it's that place in the middle of the two things, the being entirely responsible and knowing you're not responsible. And that's what feelings tell us exactly where we are on that kind of scale. So I was just going to see if anyone's got any other questions and wants to write something in the chat box. We've got another couple of minutes for questions. If not, I have got another one kind of written down here, and we can always yap a bit more, can't we, Deb?
Oh, no, I'm not good at that at all.
So nothing's flashing up. So our next question that we'd kind of got written down here was someone, it's literally 2 words, so I might have to expand on it a little bit. It's why me? And so I think I'll expand on that. I think that's coming from when things seem to happen to us and life seems to go in a direction we perhaps don't want. We can, and I know I've done this, and I'm sure Deb has, and maybe some of you have, where we kind of go, why me? Why is this happening to me? This isn't what I wanted. This isn't where I wanted life to go. And we've obviously talked a fair bit about kind of life living through us. So yeah, the question is kind of why me, or why is this seemingly bad thing happening to me?
Well, the one thing that I can share around that, and with withholding the danger of talking too much about my new grandson, there's been an awful lot go on in the last few weeks since he was born. My daughter has been poorly, and he has been poorly. She has been in hospital, and he has been in hospital. And there was one particular day, I know some of you may know this if you doing some of the courses and talking to me regularly, so I do apologize for those of you that already know this, but there was one particular day my daughter had been having trouble with feeding, and she'd got abscesses in her breast, and she'd been having all sorts of treatments. And all of a sudden we went to the hospital one day thinking it was just for the next stage of the treatment, and the doctor sat us down and said, oh, we believe that something's gone wrong with the treatment. You're not responding the way that we expected you to, and we think that you might have breast cancer, so we need to do some biopsies right here and right now. And my daughter was literally, it was like her feet had been swept out from under her, and I was in shock as well. I was at the hospital with her because she can't be parted very much from her little boy because she's breastfeeding him, so I was there with her. And we were both kind of in a little bit of stunned shock and didn't quite know where to go with that. So as she had the biopsies and we left the hospital, and we decided we live quite away from the hospital because we live out in the country. So we decided just to go to a little coffee shop and have 5 minutes to kind of gather ourselves. So we were only a few minutes from the hospital, and I glanced over into the back of the car, and I noticed that Zach, the little baby, was having what I can only describe as a funny turn. And we ended up calling 999, being rushed back to the hospital. We don't even know to this day what was wrong with him, but he was going into shock and his organs were shutting down, and within minutes there was like 5 doctors all around him working on him. And literally, definitely I had a moment of, really, God, this as well, had you not kind of given us enough today, sort of thing. And with everything else that had already gone on, there was definitely that moment. And then I was eternally grateful for what I knew. I was eternally grateful that I could come to this place within me of peace. And me and my daughter have had our ups and downs in the past with everything that had gone on, and it was just beautiful to be able to be there for her in this place of peace. And I had no idea at the time what the outcome was, but after the why me question, for me then there was, well, why not me? And what I absolutely see is that with all the people that I work with, we have clients, and I have hear all sorts of things from all sorts of people. What I always know about everybody is you have everything within you to be okay no matter what the circumstances. I've watched people, I've heard people talk to me about what's going on with them, and I've kind of thought, oh my gosh, I have no idea how I would deal with that. But what I do know is the way that human beings are built, the way that we are, is we have the resources in any given moment to deal with whatever it is going on for us in that moment. What we are not so great at is when we go into our heads, either before it or afterwards. In that moment, we have everything, all the resources for whatever it is, and we can trust life and we can trust ourselves. But what we tend to do is then go into what if, oh my goodness, look what could have happened. And that is when we find ourselves panicking and getting in a mess, when we're going over and over and over again, things that have happened or what might happen. And what I have really found incredibly useful since coming across this understanding is just kind of the absolute knowing that I do not ever have to listen to that kind of thinking, even when it's happening in my mind. I don't have to take any notice of it, and I don't have to listen to it. And I cannot tell you how helpful that has been over these past few weeks, dealing with everything that's gone on with my daughter and my grandson. So ultimately, the why me question to me is, why not me? Why not?
What I really heard in that story, which I absolutely loved, was the moment where you said, after Laura had been told that she had to have biopsies and stuff, and you kind of came out of the hospital and you went off to find a space to have some coffee because you just wanted to gather yourselves. And that to me points to what we're sharing here. We have an innate wisdom that knows what we need to do. And sometimes we need to gather ourselves. Sometimes we need to take a step back. And to me, that is the inner peace that we've been talking about all night. That is what we are. That moment where you knew you needed to gather yourself, that's our inner peace coming out and going, okay, an inner peace to me comes out in us in common sense like that. It comes out in those moments. It says, right now, we need to go and gather ourselves because something, we've just been hit with something we perhaps weren't expecting, and taking a few moments to really gather ourselves. That is the absolute epitome of inner peace right there in that story.
And just for the record, Laura's results came back clear, thankfully.
Yes.
Zach has made an amazing recovery. He's brilliant. He's gorgeous. He was in hospital for 3 or 4 days, and it was a little bit iffy there, but he's made an absolute recovery now. He's great. And Laura's results came back clear. So I didn't want anybody to be kind of like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Thankfully.
Yeah. We don't seem to have had any other questions, which is fine. So I might just rattle a little bit more, because what kind of came to me as well as you were sharing that story was around peace. The reason I didn't make it to the last webinar, and the reason I really wanted to do this one, was because I was back up I lived in the Midlands. I was born and raised in the middle of England, and that's where I'd always lived. And I was back up in the Midlands when Deb did the last webinar, because my nan was very poorly. She'd been diagnosed with cancer and didn't have very long to live. And so Lucy and I decided to go back up to the Midlands and spend a few days with her, not knowing whether she literally had days, weeks or months. And we were with her in the last couple of days of her life. And I can honestly say that knowing what we know about inner peace, Lucy and I quite a few times over the course of the last few days we were with her, had the opportunity to just sit in the room with her, and we were just in the most peaceful space with my nan towards the end of her life. And it was just incredible to see that inner peace that we talk about in that space of what was obviously quite an emotional few days for the two of us, but also to just be really peaceful and beautiful with that. And for me, that was just this. We talk about this so often, and there's moments like that, like with Laura and Zach when they were poorly, and with my nan at the end of her life, where I am just so thankful that we have this inner peace and that we can talk about it and we can remind each other of it and share on these kind of webinars, that in any of those moments in life where they aren't necessarily the nicest of things to go through, and yet we can be so incredibly peaceful with them, because that is the nature of who we are.
And we can notice, even when I look back on my life, I can see even before I came across this understanding, we're not talking about something that you only get when you have this, you haven't got it and then you understand and you've got it. We already have this. Every human being has innate wisdom. Everybody has the ability to connect with their inner peace. Everybody has, there's nothing here that we're giving to you that's new to you. What I can see is incredibly different to me is it looks like the more I am aware of it, the more that I know that, the more that I can live from that space. Because it used to look like I had no idea when I was going to feel peaceful, where it was going to come from, and how it was going to come to me. You know, it was just literally random. And yet, you know, in those moments when I was stood by Zach's bed, you know, and he was lying there, it was really, really lovely to know how to fall into a place of inner peace with whatever was going on, to get quiet in my mind. And it seems like the more that I get curious, you know, when we were talking before about, you know, when people say, well, how do you do that? It just looks to me like it's a byproduct of being curious about it, around like the things that we're doing in the warrior's journey, just these kind of fun things that we do. I like to do those fun things because it gives me a moment in my life where I can play around with that. Like this week, I decided, I was talking to somebody who wanted to change some behavior, that, you know, a way that they were behaving, and they were talking to me about how hard it was to give up something that they loved and what have you. And so I decided that I would spend a week and not eat chocolate. Now, if anybody knows me, you will know that a whole week of not eating chocolate oh my gosh it was, but I just decided that I wanted to play with that. I wanted to get curious. I wanted to watch the feelings that arose. You know, this afternoon I popped to my daughter's and she had just baked a chocolate cake because she knew I was coming and she wasn't aware of what was going on, and she made me a cup of tea, and there's this gorgeous chocolate cake just kind of sat there. And I, you know, it's only fun and it doesn't matter and there's nothing riding on it, but I had made a commitment to get curious and see what happens if I stick to this idea of I'm not going to eat chocolate. First of all, can I do it? You know, can I drool in front of this chocolate cake? And you know, what goes on with me? What happens? Where do my feelings go? Where does my thinking go? I just love getting curious around those things. And for the record, so far, I haven't. When did I start? I can't remember.
I don't even know what day it is today. Are we on Thursday? It was over the weekend or Monday, wasn't it?
So far, once I made that commitment, I haven't eaten chocolate since then. But, you know, I'm open to the fact that I might, but I really, really like doing these little challenges because it doesn't look to me like one of the deepest spiritual teachings is know thyself. You know, it doesn't look like that was an accident. People who kind of pointed in this in that direction knew what they were pointing us towards. And knowing myself in all aspects, you know, who am I as a human being? What is my deeper spiritual nature? What is that? Who am I on all levels? So I love playing in that arena, and I would always invite people to get curious, because I can see that is the how of this. You know, how do we do this? How do we deepen our understanding? It looks to me like we ask, we get curious, we poke, we play around with that. That's been my experience.
Yeah, like kind of like with anything in life, you know, we've got a friend, hopefully she's coming to speak at our conference, a young girl from America who's wants to be a professional tennis player, and all she does, as far as I can tell, pretty much is plays tennis. Like, she's practicing tennis, she's, you know, she's getting fit, she's out on the court, she's being coached, she's, you know, everything she does is around that, because she can see exactly what we've just said there. If you want to know yourself, and in her case, if you want to know your game of tennis, she's out there playing tennis because that's the game for her. And we're talking, you know, in the kind of bigger picture, the game of life. So play at life, go out, be curious, learn what your, you know, best moves are on the court of life, if you like. You know, it's that you see it in sports people. If they're interested in really getting good at their game, they're going to be out playing their game. And that's what we're talking about with life here, is get out there and play your game of life. And, you know, she might have a game where she loses sometimes. We might have moments where we step out in life and something doesn't quite go how we want. We learn from that. And that is the invitation here, is to be out playing your game of life.
From that place of inner peace and absolutely knowing that you are okay.
So if you've kind of enjoyed tonight's webinar, which we hope you have, you can join our mailing list if you're not already on it, because we are doing, at the moment, we're doing loads of videos and loads of kind of blogs and whatever occurs to us, audios and things like that, to just share more of this and be as helpful as we can. So there'll be lots of stuff going out on our mailing list like that. We're putting videos out on our YouTube channel. We're sharing lots of stuff in our Facebook group, so you can join any of that stuff. You can sign up to our mailing list, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and join our Facebook group. Is called Dare to Create the Impossible. And if you can't find any of that information, you can always, we're very, very visible on Facebook. You can't miss us. So you can always get hold of us.
In our lovely Dare to Be You jumpers.
We've got creative.
Deborah here, look, sewing machine. And on the back.
The website on the back. So we're pretty visible. You can't miss us. And there's lots of ways to connect with us and get hold of kind of lots of videos and blogs and audios that we're sharing. And if you wanted to know a bit more and have a kind of one-to-one chat with us, we also do free 30-minute kind of calls about, you know, what we can do to help you and how we can listen to what's going on for you. And all of that's kind of available. We share stuff, links here, there and everywhere, so you can always find that kind of information. And obviously we do have paid courses as well if you're interested in working with us more directly. So that was kind of, I think, everything we wanted to share tonight, really.
I believe so, yes.
A couple of comments in the chat. I think people just saying thank you, great webinar, and it was lovely. You're very, very welcome.
Tonight was recorded, so you know we will send the recording link out if you wanted to listen back to any of that again. But as Beck said, you know, we're pretty accessible. We're all over the place, and
we don't hide.
No, not very much. No. And you know, we're always very keen to hear from people, and yeah, we love having conversations with people. So
yeah, do be in touch.
It was really great to have you with us.
Have you all.
And thank you. It was nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.